As we wait for the Senate to introduce climate legislation next month, another U.S. energy sector is now coming out with a set of hard facts about the House-passed bill. A new study commissioned by the American Petroleum Institute says the U.S. refining industry would be especially hard hit. Clean Sky's Tyler Suiters discussed the analysis with an API economist today. And Tyler, hasn't the government been pretty thorough in its own analyses of the ACES Act?
There have been a lot of analyses so far, Susan, regarding Waxman-Markey legislation. Already we've seen reports from the EPA, the Ag departments, also the Congressional Budget Office, plus a very widespread report from the EIA. And the numbers from that administration actually are the backbone of this new study. Now, according to the American Petroleum Institute, the EIA's report on Waxman-Markey didn't examine the potential impact on the U.S. refining industry. That's the bottom line. And the API tells me that's why we undertook this study. And this particular study points to the fact that drastic cuts in domestic fuel production will be the result of this legislation if it were to become law. Here are some of the numbers pointed out by EnSys Energy, who conducted the study for API. It says by 2030, refining throughput here in the U.S. could fall by as much as 25%. That's a drop of about 4.4 million barrels a day. Also, the report says U.S. refinery utilization could drop by roughly 20% by 2030. That would fall from a little above 83% utilization right now to somewhere around 63%. And another potential casualty here, according to EnSys Energy, investment in U.S. refining, the investment sector could fall by as much as $90 billion. That itself was almost a 90% drop over current levels. So today I talked to Sarah Panizak, who is a senior economist at API, and she compared the cost of this plan for the refining industry to another major recent change for U.S. refiners.
When we switched to ultra-low sulfur diesel in 2006, refiners had invested on the order of $6 billion, maybe $8 billion in the refineries to implement this fuel change. It was the largest fuel change we had done since leaded to unleaded gasoline. These costs that we're talking about are magnitudes greater. The allowance cost on refiners is on the order of $100 to $300 billion of allowance cost.
So Banaszak told me today the bottom line here, the Waxman-Markey cap and trade plan would raise U.S. refining costs and lower fuel demand. A little bit more now inside the EnSys Energy study and a few more numbers. It says a 17% drop in domestic refining production is possible, and also potentially a doubling of U.S. refined fuel imports. But another factor at work here that Banaszak and I discussed, the dearth of new refineries here in the U.S. She says, though, that's not because of a lack of investment from the industry. That has simply been a transition period for the industry. But still, it has been roughly 3 decades since this country has had its last new greenfield build, that is a new refinery, put into place.
Well, there's a little bit of argument depending on how you calculate it. You could say 25, you could say 35 years. It kind of depends on whether or not you count one refinery that was taking a brownfield site and virtually rebuilding from start. But it's in that range. It's a large number of decades. And it has to do partly with the permitting costs and the NIMBYism, the lack of acceptance in local communities, and then just pure economics. So all of those things combined have made it economically more efficient for refineries to expand their existing facilities rather than go off and try and establish a new site.
So the study commissioned by the API brought to mind another semi-recent report from back in 2007. This came from the National Petroleum Council and the Hard Truths About Energy report. We'll quote it now, specifically referring to the U.S. refining industry here. In the last 35 years, the number of U.S. refineries fell from more than 300 to 150, while the average capacity per refinery steadily increased through efficiency gains and plant expansions. That's what Banaszak was referring to. But there is a caveat here. It continues. However, domestic refining capacity has not been able to keep up with product demand, resulting in increased U.S. imports of finished product and blend stock. Again, this was back in 2007, before the economic crisis hit and before there was even so much as a whisper of Waxman-Markey cap and trade legislation. And let's make it clear that according to this EnSys Energy report, the U.S. isn't the only country or the only region that would face a refining imbalance in years to come. It says, quoting now, Asia is projected to move to a similar imbalance as the U.S., with product imports needed to bridge the supply gap. Susan, that seems problematic for China, possibly fueling the fire for that country and its reluctance to join any kind of global emissions agreement. Right.
So, Tyler, we heard the API economist talking about allowance allocations under Waxman-Markey. It sounds like the refining industry is not happy with what it would get.
Right, and so much outcry has been made about which industries did get what under those allocations. Waxman-Markey gives out 85% of these allocations to start the plan. The refining industry, though, of those 85%, gets roughly 2.25% of all the total emission allowances. And realize how much of the emissions pie this sector is responsible for, both through refining and also the usage of many of these products. So in a recent Washington Post op-ed, it happened just this Sunday as a matter of fact, about the likelihood of climate legislation in the Senate this fall, one of these pieces said that oil and gas, that particular industry, needs a bigger piece of the allocation pie that may come during the Senate negotiations that could make it more palatable for lawmakers from those states to get on board with the climate plan. But the C&T, the cap and trade originator, the person who kind of put this plan together 30 plus years ago, it was still a theory at that point, has come out recently, I believe it was in New York Times, in which he said he has doubts about the plan working as it is, with 85% allocations to start, and if that piece gets even bigger, even up to 100%, he has very serious doubts that this will work at all.
Right. Just one of the many compromises that may be coming. Tyler Suiters, thank you.